So our methodology, we ran over the last 2 weeks, so this data is very current, we ran an 8-question pulse, and we went out to just under 1,250 PRCA members. And we took some time to actually create what I would say a more intimate sample, in terms of having a group of agency MDs included, 273 of those, in-house communications leads as well, 131 of those, and then the remaining part of the sample are individual PRCA members, which would be, you know, anybody who's sort of working in the junior account team and above. We hit a response rate of 5%, which is generally the response rate we hit for most of these pulses. So 61 people out of 1,236 replied, but that was put against an open rate of 304, which basically means 304 people out of that total sample actually opened the pulse, and then the remaining 61 responded. So we kicked off with a question around how happy do you feel about returning to the office? And encouragingly, 56% of the total 61 people said they're happy to return to the office. And when we looked at it from an agency MD perspective, 1 in 2 agency MDs said they are really up for returning to the office, which is encouraging. Here's a comment that was shared by an agency director, who said they're looking forward to seeing other team members, building back relationships and rapport, reconnecting, also fears of virus spread, but nonetheless still feeling reassured that the company measures are in place to mitigate that. The biggest fear is going back to a culture of presenteeism, which I thought was very interesting, because pre-COVID, there's no doubt that in the PR and comms industry, this whole notion that we all have to be in the office together, we have to see one another in order to be able to get the job done, and working from home was sort of, you know, kind of frowned upon. You know, were people actually working from home if they said they were? And if there's one thing that COVID has done, it has opened up the whole working from home dynamic, and the fact that so many businesses have just had to take that leap of faith and trust one another. And the other themes coming through from those comments in terms of what's driving this happiness to return to work, you know, some people were talking about the need to rid themselves from a feeling of isolation, almost claustrophobia of being at home and not being able to interact with others. This real desire to reconnect. But interestingly, and sort of back on that working from home message, many people asking for more balance. They want a sort of a 2 to 3 day in the office option, and a much more flexible working model. So on that same question, interestingly, 1 in 4 people said they had mixed feelings about returning to the office, and that was actually slightly higher with the in-house members. And then if we look at a couple of the comments around that as to what's driving that. So here an in-house comms lead shared, I would like to return to the office, but not full time. I've enjoyed having my own space and find it's reduced my anxiety, being comfortable in my own home. However, I also do need to get out of these 4 walls and see other people at some point. Maybe a 2 to 3 ratio would be ideal. So not only echoed in agency, but echoed in clients as well, in terms of this flexible working model. So our second question, this was an open-ended question that we asked. We sort of were very curious to know what people felt we'd actually lost as PR and comms professionals during COVID, certainly during the first sort of 3 to 4 months of it having its impact. And you can see here there are a lot of powerful, I would say, comments around what people have missed. And I would also add, with this particular pulse, while we had 61 people replying, about 3/4 of them all left comments for every single question that we put to them, showing that there's obviously quite a lot of emotion attached to this topic. So here are just a selection of the comments that were left around what we have lost as professionals. The power of brainstorming effectively and creativity being limited when stuck in our own homes. That personal touch in meeting and connecting, easy camaraderie. It's much harder to manufacture that when it's being done online and not face to face. Quite a lot of comments around having access to not just consumer journalists, but journalists per se. That's proved to be quite challenging. And the confidence as well, working with that confidence of consumer PR brands to keep spending. Another comment here around the control over workload. There are quite a lot of people talking about how, you know, there's been a blurring, you know, 12-hour days have felt very, very long. You know, needing that respect for downtime, and still that perennial age-old feature, I think, of the PR and comms industry in terms of being able to say no when you need to. People being less inclined to think strategically and acting reflexively, and delivering more and more work for less and less return. That was another comment that came through. And sometimes it just comes down to the basics of that opportunity to just chat with people in the office, you know, those little 5-minute catch-ups between meetings. People really, really missing that. We're a people business. I'm sure that comes as no surprise. And so, of course, if we're talking about connecting and we're talking about people having that sort of the enjoying the warmth of human relationships, it goes without question that we have to look at what impact COVID-19 has had on our mental health and well-being. Sorry about the doorbell in the background. And with that question, you can see that 77% have come back and said that COVID has impacted on their mental health. That's a very high figure, with 33% saying it's had a significant impact. And as we unpick some of the comments around that, you know, this in-house comms lead talking about how much immense pressure they've been under, whilst having to support others, you know, particularly when you're in a leadership role and you're feeling like the walls are caving in, and yet you've got to lead others. It is really challenging. And having their wants and needs as an individual tested, but interestingly, but this person feels like they know themselves so much better as a result now. So that period for reflection, if you like, does have its benefits. And then a tech agency CEO, I really liked this comment. I felt it came straight from the heart. There's been good and bad, they say. The good impact is that I'm no longer enduring a 4-hour round trip commute, and I haven't left the country this year, so lots more time with the family. The bad impact is I'm really missing the social side of the job. Despite the Zoom calls and the like with industry peers, it's just not the same. I rely on this more than I did for my mental health. And again, as we dig around this mental health issue, other themes coming through. I mentioned the blurred boundaries. You know, a lot of people like this tech CEO delighted by the absence of the commute, but the stress of working longer hours. And, you know, this feeling of having really important work to do, but with high level consequences. And, you know, there's this underriding sentiment, a feeling of this is going to be the next thing we have to deal with when we go back to the new norm, when we go back to working in the office. It's almost like there's going to be a wave of mental health issues, pointers that we have to deal with and we have to consider going forward. So, and then our next question looked at whether we thought people were making, in essence, a bit of a fuss about all of this. Are they actually over-exaggerating their concerns? 39% said nobody is. And actually in-house, 56% saying not really, you know, people are really not over-exaggerating it. There's this real sort of team spirit in terms of getting on with the job. And this detailed comment from an in-house comms lead who said, I line manage 7 people, all of whom have different needs and different concerns. Some, particularly younger members of the team, are missing the human interaction of working in the office. as their social lives are more tied up with their colleagues than many of the older colleagues. That can have mental health impacts, so is something I'm monitoring and discussing regularly. Other people in the team have had vulnerable relatives and friends, so are absolutely justified in being concerned about the potential impact of the pandemic. So, you know, you feel that people are carrying quite a lot of weight on their shoulders, but still managing to get on with the job, which is really encouraging. You know, overall, people are just cracking on. There are obviously different risk appetites, different ways of managing risk, and different sort of impacts from people's personal situations as well to consider. So when we do get back to some normality, what did people say in terms of what they were most afraid of? And we gave a selection of options for this question. It was a further wave of the virus, their personal safety being compromised, one of their friends or colleagues catching COVID, one of their family catching COVID, and being able to travel safely regardless of the destination. 39% have come back and basically said they're afraid of their family members contracting COVID, but this interestingly was much higher in-house, with 63% saying that. And when we looked into the comments, I'll just touch on this comment, which I thought was very interesting from an agency MD. You know, pushing aside the whole COVID piece, the COVID dynamic, there has been this big thing called Brexit going on in the background, and the impact of Brexit on the UK, they say, will be far more far-reaching than the pandemic. Utterly self-inflicted pain, but the nation democratically chose it, so we have to live with the consequences. So, you know, on the one hand, you've got all these, the rise of mental health issues, and then you've got the political arena and the impact that that is going to have on the way that we do business that we can't overlook. Other people in the comments were talking about a further loss of freedom. They were really afraid of that. Traveling during rush hour, there's a definite desire for this sort of, you know, if we're talking about flexible working, let's make those hours flexible as well. Less of the get in by 8, you know, more of the get in by 10, the leave at 4. And also one person interestingly saying they were concerned about their childcare. So good question here. Do you believe all your colleagues actually pulled their weight during lockdown? Well, a corking 88% said that their colleagues pulled their weight, and that was 63% for the in-house people. One agency MD saying here, all of my team tried very hard, but some of them got swamped by their own highly justifiable worries about what their future held and just weren't able to function to their usual level. Which I think is really interesting. You know, this question, it was very positive in terms of this feeling that there was a sense of responsibility that just runs really high. And, you know, I think responsibility, if it was a gene or part of the PR and comms professional DNA, it sits at the core. You've just got to be prepared to take responsibility for the whole of the job to thrive in this industry. And it's really good to see that people have continued to invest and you know, pull their weight. You know, one other agency MD talked about the Herculean efforts that were being made by their team, the fact that they've been brilliant. But another commented on the psychological chasm between furloughed and retained staff, managing that balance of those staff that went on furlough, those staff who were retained. You know, how does that message actually filter through after lockdown, if you were one of the ones who were furloughed? That it's, if you like, that inevitable why me factor. So, and then in the final two questions, we wanted to have a little look at the whole sort of the giving back piece, because obviously during the pandemic, a lot of people found themselves on their knees in terms of their businesses. It was such a, you know, a shock to so many, the impact of lockdown. And did this actually inspire people to start giving more? And did they actually give more? It's one thing to think it, it's another thing to do it. Interestingly, 29% said, yes, I did. I did volunteer my comms skills in that capacity. And funnily enough, I'm sure this won't come as a surprise to people, another 29% saying they really wanted to, but they just didn't have time. We unpicked some of the comments around that. And you've got one agency here talking about what they did. We gave our time to create a campaign for the local hospice and gave digital marketing expertise to run Facebook advertising, £250,000 raised. Personally, I've also given coaching to one-on-one coaching to someone made redundant and one person wanting a career change. We're also doing some virtual work experience for a uni student. You know, in terms of what good looks like, they've definitely ticked the box here, which is great. And, you know, some of the other comments, all of them tended to steer towards just not having the time to do this, although wanting to do it. And then the final question around, you know, once the pandemic is over, can we actually, you know, close our eyes and imagine that to be so? We know that the way we work will change enormously, or certainly will change. We can say that, I think. So we thought we'd ask the question, you know, would you like to continue or start volunteering your comm skills as part of your day job? 35% saying yes, they would, but interestingly, 41% saying, yes, I would love to too, but I don't have enough time. And here, this is a comment actually from pulled from someone, if you like, at the coalface of agency life. And they say, I've tried to volunteer in the past, but my job is too time intensive and involves out of hours work as it is, meaning if I took on voluntary support, I would never have time for myself. So that is a, you know, a thought to share. Other people talked about how volunteering should be a company-wide commitment to be successful. And I also wondered whether there was a link between giving people the opportunity to give back and how that will actually impact their mental health. There's, you know, helping out other people. There's no doubt it always makes us feel good, makes us feel we've done something positive with our time, with our lives. And it's also a really nice way of feeling connected because you're obviously working with someone different. So in summary, what does all of this tell us? Most people are happy to go back to the office, which is great. But there is this prevailing theme of feeling disenfranchised as a result of working from home. And when people do go back to the office, thinking around what that actually looks like from a flexible working perspective is key. It's been frustrating to keep in touch and to bring our craft, bring the craft of communications to life. There's no doubt mental health is an ongoing concern. It was before the pandemic. It continues to be. Positively, real team spirit has emerged in terms of this sense of everyone pulling together and getting on with it mentality. Safety and loved ones are top of mind when normality returns. And it's quite clear there is a genuine desire for people to help others. And as I said, can we link that giving back in some way to improving mental health and the ability to feel connected? So thank you. That ends my bit. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand over to Koray.
Thank you, Imogen. And that was fascinating. I think there's so much to unpack there. Sean, I know that you also were hoping to share a few thoughts on the research.
Oh, yes. Do I need to pull that back up again?
They're on the slide deck we've just taken down.
Oh. Hang on a minute. Let me see. I'm going to see if I can get this up again. Bear with me.
No problem.
I shouldn't have done that, should I?
Pension bills. There we go.
Right. Is it? Yes, it tells me I'm screen sharing.
Yeah, that's good. And just increase it to a full screen.
Yeah. Hang on 1 minute. I'll just go to full screen. Show chat. No, it's not letting me do that. Now it will. There you go. Apologies, Sean.
No problem at all. We're getting you more and more used to this sort of thing. Yeah, so this is by no means an original thought, but it may be new to some people. And it's basically saying how do we lead our teams and our organizations differently during the pandemic, and potentially when things go back to whatever normal is going to be, and it's not going to go back to exactly what it was before. And this slide here is really trying to summarize what that different style of leadership might be that we need to show. Focus on the fish tank, not the fish. Focus on the environment rather than each individual member of your team. So old school management, 1950s perhaps style management is about supervising closely and trying to control the activities of everybody in our team, every fish in the fish tank. And clearly working remotely, you've got no idea what people are up to. And if you try and find out, it's going to be very difficult and probably impossible and pointless. And therefore, a different way of going about it is to see yourself as the keeper of the fish tank, a keeper of the environment, and trying to optimize that environment as much as possible, and let the fish do their thing, and trust them to do what they're doing. So, for example, keeping the water clear so that they can see. In other words, make sure that information is spread around, that there's clarity as much as you can about the way ahead and what other people are doing. And as leaders, we need to make sure that that information is spread around, that people are briefed, that we spend time with people as individuals and as a team to let them know what's going on, both inside the organization, but in terms of what's going on as well. To some extent, in the past, that has happened informally in the office around the water cooler because we've all been there, and this information has passed relatively informally. Some of that's still going on, but it's electronically done. But I think as communicators within our organizations, providing clarity as much as we can has become much more important. The other one is ensure that the temperature is warm, ensure that the environment that people are operating in is supportive as well as challenging. And that may mean recognizing that, to continue the analogy, we might have different types of fish in the fish tank, and those fish need different things. Certainly, I've got a lot of friends who are in their mid-50s like me, who have been saying, well, I don't see what the problem is. I'm quite happy here in my big house, and I've got an office. I've got a room I can use as an office, and I'm not commuting 4 hours a day or whatever it is. Isn't life really rather jolly? And when you speak to people in their 20s who are sharing a kitchen table with 3 other flatmates, also huddled around their laptops, they are in a very different place. They don't have an outside space. They don't even have a balcony, let alone a garden. And if you remember the great weather that we had back in March, in fact, as soon as lockdown happened, suddenly the sun came out. And it was almost like a holiday kind of atmosphere to some extent. For people in flats and apartments, that's very different. So for those of us who are perhaps more mature and well set up, we need to remember that not everybody in the team is like us, and they have different needs. So we need to ensure that the environment is tailored to them, but is warm and supportive rather than challenging, and trying to get everybody to conform to the way that we want to work. We need to provide a stimulating environment, and we saw a rash of quizzes and cocktail sessions and a whole bunch of things. Imogen, you picked up on that. One of the comments was something about sometimes it felt a little bit manufactured, I think. And I think that's true. And I think we've seen a decline in some of that happening now. But I do think that most of us, even if we're set up in a nice office in a big house sort of thing, we're still getting fed up with these 4 walls. And again, and one of the comments said, I'm getting fed up looking at the same 4 walls. And there is a lack of stimulation. And I think leaders need to continue to have that in mind as well. And fundamentally, it's about feeding the fish what they need, finding out what they need. It could be information, it could be reassurance, it could be one of those quizzes or a cocktail session. It could be opportunities to develop skills and do some learning alongside actual kind of work, and being open to and curious about what people need, and seeing it as part of our role to provide that, and less trying to govern and supervise where each fish is individually swimming. That control freakery has taken a real battering. And I hope that it doesn't come back when we start to move back to the office in whatever way that happens. So there you go. I hope that's a useful image for people. Focus on the fish tank, not the fish. I think there's one more slide, Imogen, as well, isn't there?
Yes, hang on 1 second. Done it? Has it? Yes.
There we go. This is a much less attractive slide, way more sort of managerial in its tone, but I think it makes a good point. This is all about spending more time leading. So this is Erskine Nash's sort of core leadership model, and it basically says we all operate in 3 modes of behaviour and mindset throughout the day, and they're all equally as good as each other. They're all good. One at the bottom is operator mode. This is where you roll your sleeves up, dive in, and help out. Whether other people find it as helpful as you think you're being is an interesting question, but it's getting involved. And it's certainly in times of emergency, when we need all hands to the pump, operator mode, hands-on delivery, that red box down the bottom is a very attractive place to go and sometimes necessary. In the middle, in the blue boxes, we've got manager mode, and this is where we are providing structure. That might be getting the spreadsheet out, doing some planning, doing some strategizing, setting targets, updating dashboards, all of that good stuff. And of course, when you're working remotely and electronically, you can get on with that stuff. On the other side is providing ideas. So if you're in a managerial or leadership position, you've been an operator, you're good at it, that's why you got promoted, and you provide guidance to people for their own good, to help them. They don't always see it that way, by the way, but we do it. And I think there's a real danger that working remotely, we can be very transactional. We can spend a lot of our time in the red box or the blue boxes. And we don't spend enough time in the green boxes at the top, which we call leader mode. And my proposal there is that there are 3 core activities. One is that clarity thing. It's continually providing people with purpose. It's not enough to have objectives and tasks. People want to be connected to a higher purpose. By the way, that was true before lockdown, but I think it's now really been highlighted. And it's making sure that people are up to date with the context. It's about storytelling. And my goodness, people in PR and comms should be doing that. Anyway, I wonder how well you do it for your own teams. In the middle is building capability. People don't want to just feel that life has stopped, that suddenly it's just about getting tasks done. Particularly younger people will want to feel they've still got an opportunity to experience coaching and mentoring, maybe have access to online learning, and to develop their capabilities. They want to be confident about the future, rather than just focused on now. And then finally, I think it's really important that as leaders, we continue to build relationships outside the organisation, but also and give time and effort to it. We know that it would happen naturally, particularly in the office. When you're working remotely, it takes a bit more effort. And fundamentally, it's about continuing to develop the culture of the organisation. Culture starts with leadership behaviour. And if you're not happy with the culture in your organisation, if you want to shift it, have a look in the mirror. It's probably your behaviour that needs to shift first, particularly if you're in a senior role. At Erskine Nash, what we tend to find is organisations say, we're pretty good at the blue ones, we're really good at the red one, but we're employing people as senior leaders and paying them a lot of money, and they are studiously ignoring most of the time these green boxes at the top. And that's because we don't train them, we don't help them, we don't provide them with the tools, and it's really difficult and ambiguous. And the comfort zones for most of us, me included, by the way, are in the blue and the red ones. And under pressure, which we've all been under, we revert back down to those lower boxes. But we need to equip our leaders with support, whether it be training, coaching, whatever it is, mentoring, to operate properly at that green level. So there you go. I hope that that is a useful insight.
Thanks very much for that, Sean. And again, thanks, Imogen, for unpacking what was a really extensive research project in a very short space of time. So thank you very much for that. We've had one question that's come in on the Q&A from Paul Hackett. And he says, regarding Sean's point, does the panel think that as a creative industry, we can also help our clients understand how to repurpose going into the office, especially for younger employees, in order to provide that learning by osmosis and cultural fillip that working from home has removed? Sean, give any initial thoughts on that? I think he was referring to the point that you were making just as you were finishing off there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the PR and comms industry as a whole has a massive role to play in helping people grasp the challenges of cultural change. And organisations have gone through a lot of transactional change recently. IT departments have been massively, getting laptops out to people at home. They've been changing the way that they operate on a day-to-day basis. And some organisations have grasped the nettle of cultural change, of saying, hang on, what's our purpose? What's our mission? How are we engaging our people with that? Employee communications, but also telling and reassuring customers that that's happening as well. So it's always interesting. They say that a shoemaker's shoes have always got holes in. I once had to pay a bill to an electrician. I had to turn up at his house. I pushed the doorbell. Guess what? It didn't work. He was so busy repairing everyone else's electrics, he isn't bothering to do his own. So the PR and comms industry absolutely is in a great place to help organisations shift their culture, and purpose, in Erskine Nash's view, is absolutely the place to start. Start with purpose, get that right, and a lot of other things will fall into place. The question is whether the PR and comms industry is ready to do this to itself. I think, actually.
Rod,
by the way, training and coaching companies and management consultancies are really rubbish at spending time developing our own skills and accessing coaching. So I hold my hand up to that as well.
I'll just echo that, Sean. I'm always interested when you board a plane and you're sitting there waiting to take off, bear with me. They always say, please make sure your oxygen mask is fitted safely first before helping others. And I always think, particularly on issues like our own comms and our own culture change, but also our own mental health, we're very good at going, right, client, we know what's going on. And they go, but hold on, look at your own culture. So I do think that, to stretch my own metaphor, that making sure your oxygen mask is fitted before trying to help others, because otherwise you also run that risk of your own people going, well, it's fantastic, we're doing some culture change with our clients. What about us? You feel like the least popular child, the runt of the litter. So I think it's pretty important to start at home. Charity and transformation begin at home. I'm full of multiple mixed metaphors today for some reason.
Thanks for that. I would absolutely agree with the point that Paul made. I think it's definitely in our own, not just our own interest, but it's our responsibility really to be providing that strategic level of guidance for clients to ensure them, to help them through that process of going through to the office. I think both Sean and Imogen already touched on the idea that this pandemic has really encouraged practitioners to adopt a more strategic role and be focused on how the work that they do and how it impacts on the client's overall business objectives. And that's a perfect example of a position where we can lead on. There's also obviously the internal comms angle of that as well, because internal communications professionals will be really front and center of those efforts to engage employees and make sure that they're happy and really content with whatever working from home arrangements are changed around. So I think it's a huge opportunity for the industry. One of the other things that kind of kept popping up throughout both the presentations, and Rod, you just touched on it again now, was mental health. And it was interesting to see, Imogen, that one of the comments seemed to suggest that the office was almost a bit of a safe haven for some employees. I was just interested to get your thoughts on that and how you see that carrying forward into 2021.
I think it just goes back to this being a people business at the end of the day. You know, anybody working in PR and comms has to love working with people, interacting with people of all different walks of life, all different backgrounds. You know, clients are so diverse. You know, agency people are so diverse as well. You've got to enjoy being in that environment. And I think, you know, when it comes to mental health, what makes you happy, there's nothing better than having a laugh with one of your colleagues, than going in and doing a new business pitch, and maybe it goes brilliantly and you're really on a high, or it goes terribly and it's just an unmitigated disaster. Being able to share that warmth, that human empathy, I think is the lifeblood. Yeah. And COVID has challenged that, not just in the PR and comms industry, but across the board. But if it's challenged it, it's also thrown a spotlight on how much we value it. And I think, you know, as people, we can do very big and positive things by acting on those Achilles heels, acting on that, oh, this is really getting me down, I'm feeling really depressed. You know, I felt of all the pulses we've run, this pulse had a very, very strong current of emotion running through it. Everybody was sort of leaving comments like they were in a conversation, like they were just, oh, and another thing. And by the way, and yes, they did. And, you know, and that in itself, I think when channeled in the right direction can only be a good thing as we go back, because we will cherish that more, cherish that human interaction, which, you know, ticks the box, or one of the boxes on mental health for me.
Can I chuck in a few thoughts on that? Because I think that if you look at how we as a country, in fact, the world has responded, you know, at weddings, they wish the bride and groom health, wealth and happiness. Well, I think that public policy, understandably, has been very focused on the first of those two, public health and the economy. And I'm just really worried, and I think we'll see this reflected in our own cultures as organizations, that the happiness bit and the mental health bit has a very long tail that is going to whip round very quickly. I'll stick in the chat box some ONS data around mental health, but you know, the headline from their last report is that adult depression has doubled between pre-lockdown and post-lockdown. It's particularly prevalent in 16 to 39-year-olds and women. And I just think we at our peril think of mental health as sort of a nice to have, something that we should be doing, something that HR should be dealing with. I view it as absolutely fundamental to differentiating between organizations and employers, frankly, that people want to work for, and those that don't. Just a quick second. Having come to this late, I've been playing catch-up processing. I think that the other thing that's really important about that is that, you know, what is a company? Something we belong to, and without getting all Maslow hierarchy on people, there is a real sense of belonging that a lot of us, particularly younger people perhaps, have been lacking. So I think, you know, you need as an organization to think about your mission, your vision and your culture and how it's relevant to the new normal. And remember that the new normal isn't completely new. It's the old normal on steroids. So you need to actively work out, what does the new normal mean for your culture, and how does your culture respond to the new normal? You have to be really clear on expectations of what good looks like. What does productivity mean in the new normal? You know, you've got to be really careful to not assume you know how people feel. You have to listen. You have to show that you're listening. And Sean made this point really powerfully. Remember that not everybody is the same. And my final thought amongst my ramblings is that you have to be really clear on the practicalities. I loved Sean's point about toggling between leadership and management. And I think that's going to be one of the real challenges, is toggling between leadership and management, between principle and practicality, between strategy and tactics. But I think at the tactical level, you know, things that before would have been in a drawer, which is your policies, your mental health procedures, you need to bring them out, dust them down, and talk about them as part of the listening process. Because if you assume that people go, oh, we're back in the office, we're going to have a lovely pitch and we're going to go for drinks, it's not enough. You've got to put your culture and your policies visibly front and center, remembering that the new normal is the old normal on steroids. There we go. Sorry, multiple ramblings. They just all fell out.
Thanks for that, Rod. I think
our take on it is historically we've probably not talked about mental health. We use different words to describe that. Whether that will change or not is an interesting question. When we're working with teams, particularly senior teams like a board, but teams at any level, if people want to take their team from A to B, from somewhere they are now to somewhere better, generally speaking, the order that you want to do this in is, first of all, really clarify your purpose and engage people's hearts and minds with that purpose. Have a common understanding of what that purpose is. And the second one is create psychological safety. In other words, create conditions through your own behavior as a leader where people feel able to express their views, their concerns, to ask questions without fear of being ridiculed or ignored or criticized, and to express their own personal concerns. And I'm sure we've all worked in organizations or been in meetings where we're thinking, I should say this, or I have a question and I'm not sure whether I feel sufficiently safe to express my need or my concern. And that is not great for effectiveness. It's not great for productivity, and it's not great for mental health. So I'm not going to say always, but generally speaking, the recipe for getting a team more effective is, one, clarify your purpose, get everyone engaged around that. And then secondly, create a sense of psychological safety where people are able to express themselves. And actually, you know, you don't want groupthink, particularly in the creative industry.
Thanks for that, Sean. We've just had another comment from Paul, who says Rod is 100% right. We work closely with UCLH and UCL Centre for Behaviour Change. The leadership team at the Royal College of Psychiatrists have told us that the UK is heading for a tsunami of mental well-being challenges that we very likely do not have the resources for. So I think it's a stark warning there. And I think that's one that is particularly relevant for our industry. And we know, not just from this research, but from multiple research studies on mental health that have been conducted both for PR and broader society, that we work in an industry that suffers from this issue more than most. So last month, we published research which showed that 26% of PR professionals said that their job was extremely stressful. So that means they rated it between 8 or 9 and 10 on a scale of 1 to 10 when asked how stressful is your job. And that compared with 18% of wider society. So we already know that our industry, whether it's the kind of deadline culture, the immediacy and social media, the 24-hour news cycle, it seems to be a cocktail of ingredients.
Sorry, Koray, you froze for probably the last 45 seconds. You'll be pleased to hear.
So, I was just making the point that our industry is quite unique in that many of the issues and specific challenges that we work across really pull these issues to the fore. And I was just saying that last month we published research which showed that 26% of professionals said that they found their job extremely stressful compared to 18% of the wider population. So we know that we're in a really serious situation with this. So I think it's something that leaders have to heed in our industry, certainly.
Can I tuck in a thought on that? And this is going to sound like an advert, but it really isn't. There's a Facebook group that some of you may be on, which Stephen Waddington set up at the start of March. And one of the most striking things about that community, it's about 1,300 PR and comms pros, is a couple of things. One is the degree of honesty and vulnerability about how hard people have been hit, and also the lack of bravado. And the little advert, which I hope you won't mind, Koray, is that we're running a series of 4 sessions called the Mental Health Half Hour, starting next Tuesday and next Wednesday at 2 o'clock, with a wellbeing specialist, looking at why we feel the way that we do and what we can do about it. And I throw that in not by way of an advert, but simply to say that the demand and the interest in well-being, both scientifically and non-scientifically, says we really need to take this long tail seriously. To Paul Hackett's point, the data are starting to look really, really scary on mental health. I know I sound obsessed, but I do think we need to seriously look at this as we move to the return to work and to hybrid and blended working.
Thanks for that. Well, then I know Rebecca's just sent a message to the panelists asking for that link. So perhaps if you could drop that in the chat box, then people could see that.
Yep, happily.
Just the final point on mental health before we move on. That research study that I was referring to, one of the more positive aspects of that is that it showed people were being more transparent about the reasons for taking time off due to mental health concerns. So last year, for example, we found that 40% of people were upfront about having to take time off for their mental health, and that jumped to 70% this year. So that does show that people are more comfortable talking about this. Even though there are certainly challenges ahead, I think we're, in terms of having the conversation at work, I think we're in a stronger position than we've ever been, really. The final point I thought we'd move on to was, well, that's something that really struck me about this research was the general theme of positivity that ran throughout it. You know, people were talking about how colleagues were pulling their weight and about how they were happy to return to the office, and the spirit of volunteering and the spirit of community in the industry, which really stuck out. Imogen, I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that spirit and camaraderie that seemed to kind of permeate the study, and do you how likely do you believe that will be carried through into next year?
That's a really interesting question. I think I'll answer the second bit first. I think it's very clear there is a desire to help out, you know, whether that's volunteering, whether that's just supporting a colleague during a challenging time. I think the issue is, though, having the time and the freedom to do it within the day job. And that's not just for agencies, that's in-house as well, where you know, I know, having spent a long time working in-house, you can lose days in all-day marketing meetings, weeks probably of your life, because there's just so much that people have to go through, discuss, share, debate, etc. So I think that it's wonderful to see this positivity, and it's wonderful that people want to give back, want to volunteer, but I think we can also take a slightly more progressive view of it. And by that I mean, if we look at volunteering, it doesn't have to just be PR and comms skills. It could be other skills. I mean, loads of people do all sorts of things outside of work. You know, for example, Koray, you're a champion footballer. I happen to know this. You know, Sean, I know, does a lot of volunteering in education. I think that if we, and this isn't just, you know, a tiny little bit of CSR and an afterthought, this is an active part of your career. This is part of the journey of working with publics, whether you're inside an organization or whether you're, you know, in a service-based business. And I think the opportunity is there for those companies, the agencies, to and enable their staff to do this. It's mandatory, if you like. Well, not mandatory, but, you know, if you want to devote 20% of your working life to a particular cause that you're passionate about, then that is just part of the professional curricula. And that, to me, you know, it really picks up that flag of positivity and takes the words, takes the feedback and puts it into action.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And it's certainly one of the things that we've noticed at the PRCA this year. And one of the really defining trends of the year has been collaboration amongst members and partners of organisations who'd usually be rivals and competitors. At the beginning of the pandemic, we set up the COVID-19 task force, and we were really inundated with messages from people right across the world who just wanted to help. And we had more than 100 people come together to deliver lots of free sessions and advice for people that need it. And Rod was a deputy chair of that group. So Rod, I'm sure you'd agree that that kind of collaborative spirit has definitely been one of the key trends in this year.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it was interesting because, you know, having said it was a global task force, we thought, well, if we're going to make it global, shouldn't we collaborate? So long story short, we picked up the phone, and by the time we were done, every single global PR body was part of this. That wasn't a hard exercise. We merely asked the question and they went, why wouldn't we collaborate? And I think at a more sort of prosaic day-to-day level, thinking about how do you as an agency or a corporation harness that desire to give back sort of institutionally? Because, you know, harsh facts, we heard from Rishi Sunak yesterday, this is the lowest level of economic, or the biggest drop in economic output for 300 years. We've talked about the long tail of the mental health pandemic. I'm being very cheery today. My point is that people want to be part of an organisation that is seen to be part of the solution to that. I know when I was at Ketchum for a decade, one of the best things was the annual community day, which wasn't just about PR. It was about going out and helping to paint the inside of a local church or work in a garden for a local old people's home. So I just think, how do you transpose that desire to help and volunteer into what you do organisationally? I think can be very powerful. And it's a real, forgive me for this, win-win for both you and your teams.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Sean, any thoughts on that from a leadership development point of view?
Yeah, I was volunteering before the pandemic happened, and I've kept doing it during the pandemic, and I think it's helped me massively. The truth of volunteering is it looks like you're doing it solely to help other people, but I think anybody that does it realizes that one of the reasons that we keep doing it, if we're honest, is there's this incredibly positive feedback loop, and it's kept me sane over the last few months, and I'm looking forward to continuing to do it. What I find is if I allocate the time to it in my diary, funnily enough, everything else flows around it.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point and an important one to end on. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. So all that's left for me to do is say a huge thank you to Sean, Imogen and Rod for joining us on this discussion. And we've had some really positive contributions from the audience as well.